They abandoned her for saying no. A human warrior refused to let her die. Yelena stood in the great hall, her heart pounding as the alien representatives stood before her. The room was filled with the scent of alien perfumes, the faint hum of technology in the air, and the buzz of conversations in languages she couldn't understand. She had been invited to this summit, an honor she never imagined receiving. It had been a momentous day for her people, an opportunity to form an alliance with one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. But as she looked across the room at the towering alien leaders, she felt a weight in her chest, a sinking sensation she couldn't ignore. They were magnificent, powerful, and their empire controlled half the galaxy. It should have been a dream. Yet, in the presence of such overwhelming power, something within Yelena rebelled. The offer had been clear. Her planet would be granted protection, technology, and resources beyond imagination if they agreed to become allies with the Empire. But the price, Yelena knew, was too high. The aliens demanded something that could never be bought. They wanted their people to submit to their will, to become part of their breeding program to create a new generation of soldiers, an army born of their genes and their enemies. For Yelena, the very thought made her blood boil. She had spent her entire life fighting for her people's freedom, their autonomy, and their right to choose. How could she stand by while her people were traded like livestock? How could she accept such a horrific bargain? She took a deep breath and stepped forward, her voice steady as she addressed the alien leaders. "I refuse," she said, her words echoing in the room. "I refuse to allow my people to be used as tools for your war. We will not join your empire. I will not allow my people to become breeding grounds for your army." The room fell silent. The alien leaders exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Then one of them, a towering figure with green skin and silver eyes, stepped forward. "You are brave, Yelena," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "But you are foolish. The power of our empire is vast. You cannot defy us." Yelena held her ground. "I will not sacrifice my people for the sake of power. If that is your price, we will pay it with our blood." "But we will never submit to you." The leader's face twisted into a sneer. "Very well, you have made your choice." With that, the conversation ended. The summit collapsed into chaos, with murmurs and whispers filling the room. Yelena's people, once united, now looked at her with fear and uncertainty. The alien empire was not known for its mercy. It was a force of destruction, and those who defied it rarely lived to tell the tale. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her. She had defied the aliens, and now her people would pay the price. And they did. It started with the whispers behind her back. As soon as the summit ended, the council members who had supported her began to distance themselves. They spoke in hushed tones, avoiding eye contact, unsure whether they had made the right decision. The alien empire's wrath was no small thing, and no one wanted to be the target of their vengeance. Soon, the betrayal came. Her people, who had once hailed her as a leader, turned their backs on her. They feared the consequences of defying the empire. They saw the empire's ships in the sky, hovering like ominous vultures, waiting to strike. "You're on your own now, Yelena," one of her closest allies said, his voice trembling. "We can't protect you. If you continue to resist, we'll be destroyed. Our people will suffer. We can't risk it." Yelena's heart sank as she watched her people turn away from her. The fear in their eyes was unbearable. She had made the right choice, hadn't she? She had refused to bow to tyranny, yet now she was abandoned. The alien ships hovered above, their weapons trained on the city. Her people had chosen survival. They had chosen to surrender. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice a low growl. "You'll regret abandoning me." But it was too late. Her allies were gone, and the alien ships descended. Yelena was captured. They took her to a prison, one of many scattered across the Empire's vast reach. The walls were cold and silent, and the floor was unforgiving. She was shackled, thrown into a cell without any ceremony. The guards watched her with disdain, but there was no joy in their eyes, only the knowledge that she would be used as an example for others who thought they could defy the Empire. The days passed slowly. Her body grew weak, her spirit battered by the silence and isolation. The universe seemed so far away now, but even as they tried to break her, Yelena's resolve never wavered. She had made the right choice. Her people might have abandoned her, but she would not let them forget what she had done for them. She had stood up for what was right, and no matter how much they tried to crush her, she would never give in. She was still defiant, still burning with the fire of someone who refused to be silenced. Days turned into weeks. The food was sparse, the water even sparser. Her skin was pale, her body aching from the lack of proper care. But still she held on. She was a warrior, and warriors did not break easily. Then on one fateful evening, something changed. A figure appeared at the door of her cell. It was a man, human by the looks of him. His eyes were filled with determination, and his posture was confident. He wore armor, dark and sleek, as if he had walked through hell itself to get here. There was no mistaking him for a mere soldier. He was something more. The guards who had been standing nearby took one look at him and backed away. He wasn't one of theirs. He was something entirely different. "I'm here to get you out," the human said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. Yelena's eyes widened in disbelief. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Someone who believes in what you stand for," he replied, his tone unwavering. "I won't let them take you." Yelena could hardly believe what she was hearing. A human, a warrior, and he was here risking everything to save her. But why? The human's face softened. "We have to go now." Yelena couldn't believe her eyes. There standing before her was a human warrior, his eyes full of determination. The quiet, desolate prison cell had suddenly filled with the possibility of escape, and yet she was still unsure if this was real or just another cruel twist of fate. Was she dreaming, or had the universe truly sent someone to help her? "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from days of silence and confinement. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved to the door of her cell, inspecting the security system with a quiet intensity. His movements were swift and deliberate, as though he had done this many times before. After a few moments, a soft click echoed through the room. The door was open. "Marcus," he said simply, his voice firm but calm, "I'm here to get you out." Yelena's heart skipped a beat. She had heard whispers of humans before, stories of their stubbornness, their ability to survive against all odds, but she never thought one would come to her aid. Humans were a distant and often underestimated species in the galaxy, far from the mighty empires that ruled the stars. Yet here was one, risking his life to free her. For a moment, Yelena simply stared at him. She wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, but there was no time. She could feel the walls closing in around her, the weight of her captivity still heavy on her shoulders. It was as though the universe had given her a final chance at freedom, and she didn't want to waste it. "You're risking everything to free me?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. Marcus turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers with a steady gaze. "I've seen enough of what the Empire does to people like you," he said. "I don't stand by and watch it happen. And I don't expect you to thank me, but we need to move." Yelena felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. For the first time in weeks, she felt the surge of something beyond fear, something that felt like the will to fight. This human, this Marcus, was offering her the chance to escape, to continue the fight she had started. It was all she had left. She had nothing to lose anymore. Without another word, she pushed herself up from the cold, hard floor of her cell. Her legs were weak from days of neglect, but she forced herself to stand tall. She was a warrior, and this human would see her strength. She would not let him down. As she followed Marcus through the corridors, Yelena couldn't help but be amazed at how effortlessly he moved. His presence was like a shadow, blending into the darkness, never making a sound. The prison complex was designed to hold the most dangerous prisoners, and the walls were lined with guards. Yet, Marcus seemed to glide through it all without so much as a hint of fear. His confidence was contagious, and Yelena found herself focusing on the rhythm of his movements, trusting him completely despite the unknown. They moved swiftly, avoiding the patrolling guards, and Yelena couldn't help but wonder how many times Marcus had done this before. He was like a ghost in the shadows, always one step ahead of the enemy. His eyes remained fixed on the path ahead, never faltering, as if the escape was already a done deal in his mind. Yelena, on the other hand, felt the weight of every step, the uncertainty of their situation pressing on her. She wasn't used to relying on anyone, let alone a human who had appeared out of nowhere. But something about Marcus reassured her. He had come for her when no one else would, and that was enough to make her trust him. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't alone. As they turned a corner, the soft clink of a guard's armor echoed in the distance. Yelena's heart pounded in her chest as Marcus motioned for her to stop. They pressed their backs to the cold, stone wall, holding their breath as the guard passed by, unaware of their presence. Once the sound of footsteps faded, Marcus gestured for her to follow. They moved on, weaving through the labyrinth of hallways until they reached a small room. The door was locked, but Marcus was already working on it. With a few quick movements, he had it open, revealing a small, dimly lit space. "We're almost there," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one had followed them. Yelena could feel the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her, but she pushed it aside. She wasn't going to stop now. She couldn't. The Empire had tried to break her, but they had failed. Now she had the chance to fight back. Marcus led her through the narrow passageway, and soon they were outside the prison walls, the cold night air biting at their skin. Yelena breathed in deeply, the fresh air a sharp contrast to the stale, suffocating air of the prison. She could hear the distant hum of alien ships overhead, the Empire's forces still hunting for her. But for now, they were safe. "We need to move quickly," Marcus said, his voice low but urgent. "There's a shuttle not far from here. We can get you off this planet and find a place where you can rest." Yelena nodded, the exhaustion from her days of confinement beginning to catch up with her. But she didn't let it show. She was a warrior. She would rest when the fight was over. They ran through the darkness, moving swiftly and silently, making their way to the shuttle. As they neared the craft, Yelena felt a sense of relief wash over her. She was almost free. Almost. But just as they were about to board the shuttle, the distant sound of engines roared to life. The Empire's forces had found them. Marcus cursed under his breath. "We're going to have to fight our way out." Yelena's pulse quickened as she drew her weapon. It had been too long since she had fought, too long since she had felt the rush of battle. But now, standing beside Marcus, she knew she had a chance to fight back, to show the Empire that they could not break her. She would not be their victim. With a determined glance at Marcus, she followed him to the shuttle, ready for whatever came next. The fight was far from over, but with this human by her side, she knew they would stand a chance. As the shuttle lifted off, the stars stretched out before them, a reminder of the vast universe that awaited them. Yelena had made a choice, and though the road ahead was uncertain, she would fight for her freedom. She would fight for all those who had been abandoned by the Empire, and she would never stop. The shuttle soared through the skies, its engines humming steadily as it ascended from the planet's surface. Yelena sat in silence, her body still sore from the months of imprisonment. The cold metal of the shuttle's interior felt strangely comforting, but it couldn't erase the exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin. Marcus sat across from her, his eyes constantly scanning the darkened cockpit. He was calm, his expression focused, yet Yelena could see the tension in his jaw. The same tension she felt deep in her bones. They had escaped, yes, but the war was far from over. The Empire would be hunting them, and they wouldn't stop until they had caught their prey. Yelena shifted in her seat, glancing at Marcus. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice hoarse but steady. He met her gaze, his eyes unreadable for a moment. "We're heading to a safe haven," he said. "A place far enough from the Empire's reach where we can lay low for a while." She nodded, though doubts lingered in her mind. She had no idea where they were going, and for the first time in years, she felt vulnerable. She had been a leader, a warrior, someone who was used to fighting on her own terms. But now she was depending on Marcus, a human she barely knew, to keep her safe. For a moment, silence hung in the air between them, thick and heavy. She thought back to her planet, her people, the ones who had abandoned her. She wondered if they were still alive, still hiding in fear of the Empire's wrath. They had turned their backs on her, but what about the others? What about the generations that would come after? Were they doomed to live in servitude to the Empire? "Why did you come for me?" she asked, her voice softer this time. "You could have just left. There are no alliances between humans and my people. You didn't have to risk your life for someone like me." Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared ahead as though lost in thought. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "I've seen what the Empire does to people. I've seen the way they treat those who can't fight back, and I can't stand by and let that happen. I may not have known you before today, Yelena, but I knew what was right, and I won't let you die because of a decision you made." Yelena felt something stir within her. It wasn't gratitude, not exactly. She wasn't someone who needed to be saved. But there was something in his words, something raw and real, that made her feel less alone. She had been abandoned by her own, but now she had someone by her side, someone who believed in fighting for what was right, even when it seemed impossible. She leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for a moment. The hum of the shuttle's engines was a constant, grounding sound. It had been so long since she had felt peace, even if it was fleeting. But peace was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had made her choice, and now she would see it through no matter what it cost her. The shuttle lurched suddenly, breaking her thoughts. Yelena's eyes snapped open, and she immediately turned to Marcus, who was already adjusting the controls. His face was tense, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What's happening?" Yelena asked, her voice sharp. "We've been spotted," Marcus said, his voice calm but laced with urgency. "The Empire's ships are closing in. We've got to get out of here now." Yelena's heart raced, adrenaline surging through her veins. She had known this moment was coming, but it still hit her like a punch to the gut. The Empire would never let her go so easily. They would track her down, no matter where she went. "Can you outrun them?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The Empire's ships were faster, more advanced, and far more powerful. It was only a matter of time before they caught up. Marcus didn't answer right away. His fingers moved quickly over the controls, and Yelena could see the intensity in his eyes. He was calculating their next move, trying to figure out a way to escape the inevitable. "We're going to try," he said finally, his voice steady. "But we need to find a place to hide. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve, but we can't keep running forever." Yelena gritted her teeth, her grip tightening around the armrest. She wasn't used to being the one who needed to hide. She was a warrior, not a coward, but this wasn't about pride. This was about survival. The shuttle began to bank sharply to the left, its engines roaring as it shot toward a nearby asteroid belt. Yelena held on, her heart pounding as the ship weaved in and out of the floating rocks. It was a risky move, too risky maybe, but it was their best chance. She glanced at Marcus, who was focused entirely on the controls. His jaw was clenched, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He wasn't panicking. That was something Yelena respected. She had seen warriors break under pressure, seen them crumble when the odds were too high. But Marcus wasn't one of them. Yelena's thoughts raced as they maneuvered through the dense field of asteroids. The Empire's ships would be hot on their tail, and no amount of hiding could change that. They would be found eventually. But for now, they were free, and that was enough. The shuttle jerked again, this time more violently. Yelena's stomach lurched as the ship dove toward an asteroid, narrowly avoiding a collision. She gripped the seat harder, her body tense with the strain. She knew they couldn't keep this up for long. The Empire's ships were closing in. "We need to get to the outer rim," Marcus said, his voice tight. "There's a hidden station there, a place where we can regroup." Yelena nodded. She didn't need to ask where it was. She trusted him more than she had trusted anyone in a long time. They weaved through the asteroid belt, pushing the shuttle to its limits. Every second counted now. Yelena's eyes scanned the horizon, watching for any sign of the Empire's ships. She could almost hear their engines, like a predator closing in on its prey. Suddenly, a warning light flashed on the dashboard. Yelena's heart skipped a beat. "Marcus!" she shouted. "They've locked onto us." He didn't respond immediately, his hands flying over the controls in a blur. The shuttle shook again, and Yelena could feel the ship's systems struggling to keep up. The Empire's ships were gaining on them. "We're not going to make it," Marcus said, his voice grim. "Not unless we get a little help." Yelena's mind raced. "Help from where?" "From a friend," he said, and before she could ask any more questions, a burst of blinding light exploded through the cockpit, followed by the sound of a ship's weapons firing. The Empire's ships were hit, the blinding light of their shields flashing as they were struck. The attacking ship was fast and agile, its weaponry precise and powerful. Within seconds, the Empire's lead ship was damaged, its engines flaring as it struggled to stay in pursuit. Marcus let out a breath of relief. "Looks like we've got some backup." Yelena stared out of the cockpit, her mind reeling. Who was helping them? And how did Marcus know they would come? She didn't have time to ask. The Empire was still closing in, and they had to make their move. But for the first time in a long while, Yelena felt a glimmer of hope. They might just make it out of this alive. The ship flew through the endless void of space, a trail of light from the shuttle's engines streaming behind them. Yelena sat in silence, her fingers gripping the armrest tightly. Her mind raced, replaying everything that had happened since her escape from the prison. She had never expected this. A human, a warrior from a species she once thought of as weak, risking everything to help her. It had been so long since she had trusted anyone, and yet here she was, relying on Marcus and his unwavering belief that they could win against the Empire. The thought was strange, almost laughable. But something about the way Marcus carried himself, with his steady hand at the controls and his calmness under pressure, made her feel like they could survive this. The shuttle was moving faster now, heading toward the hidden station Marcus had mentioned. It was supposed to be a place where they could regroup, gather their strength, and figure out what to do next. They couldn't stay on the run forever. Sooner or later, the Empire would catch up with them, and then there would be nowhere left to hide. Yelena glanced over at Marcus, who was focused on the navigation controls. He didn't look worried, not in the slightest. His fingers moved expertly over the buttons, guiding them through the vastness of space with ease. He was like a man who had spent his entire life living in the shadows, never truly knowing peace but always fighting for it. "How much farther?" Yelena asked, her voice breaking the silence. Marcus didn't immediately respond. He was deep in thought, his eyes scanning the data on the screen in front of him. Finally, he looked up at her, his face serious. "Not far. We should be there in a few hours." Yelena nodded, though doubt lingered in her mind. A few hours could feel like an eternity when you were running from the Empire, with nothing but the hope of survival driving you forward. And yet, they couldn't afford to stop. If they stopped now, if they slowed down, they would be caught. She turned her gaze to the window, watching the stars streak by. They were moving faster now, leaving behind the asteroid belt and the hidden dangers of the galaxy. She thought about what Marcus had said, about a hidden station. She didn't know much about it, but the idea of having a safe haven, a place to rest and plan, was almost too good to be true. A faint memory of her home planet flashed in her mind. She could see the vibrant cities, the endless fields, and the towering structures where her people had lived. But all of that was gone now. The Empire had taken it. Her people had betrayed her. And she, along with the few who had fought beside her, had been left to face the consequences of their refusal to submit. "You don't have to keep staring out there like that," Marcus said, interrupting her thoughts. "You're still with me, right?" Yelena blinked, pulling herself out of the trance. She nodded slowly. "Yeah, just thinking." "You've got a lot to think about," Marcus said. "We both do." Yelena didn't respond, instead choosing to lean back in her seat and close her eyes. She had never been good at trusting others, especially after what had happened with her people. But she was starting to realize that she didn't have to carry the weight of this fight alone anymore. Marcus had proven that, and maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. Hours passed in tense silence, the hum of the shuttle's engines the only sound in the small cabin. Yelena's mind raced, trying to piece together a plan for what would come next. They couldn't keep running forever. The Empire would eventually find them, and when that happened, there would be no safe place to hide. They needed an army to fight back, to take on the Empire and force them to retreat. But where could they find such an army? Her people had abandoned her. She couldn't trust them anymore, and the humans, despite their tenacity, were too small, too scattered. They didn't have the numbers to stand against the Empire's forces. "Marcus," Yelena said suddenly, breaking the silence. "How are we going to defeat them?" "I don't see how we can win. They're too powerful." Marcus didn't immediately answer. He simply stared ahead, his face impassive. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. "We don't need to defeat them with sheer strength. We need to defeat them with their own weaknesses." Yelena raised an eyebrow. "Their weaknesses?" Marcus nodded, his voice steady. "Every empire has a crack, a weak point, something that can be exploited, and the Empire is no different. We just need to find it." Yelena turned to face him, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Marcus's eyes met hers, his gaze unwavering. "We start by gathering allies. I know there are groups out there, rebels, outcasts, people who have been hurt by the Empire. They want to fight, but they don't have a leader. They don't have someone to unite them." Yelena felt a spark of hope ignite within her. "You want us to gather a rebellion?" "Exactly," Marcus said, his voice quiet but confident. "We fight back with strategy. We don't try to match the Empire's strength. We outsmart them, weaken their hold on the galaxy, and force them to make mistakes. And when they do, we strike." Yelena nodded slowly, considering his words. It made sense. She didn't need an army of soldiers. She needed people who were ready to fight for something bigger than themselves. People who wanted to see the Empire fall as much as she did. But it wouldn't be easy. Building a rebellion from the ground up would take time, patience, and sacrifice. And Marcus wasn't wrong when he said that the Empire had its weaknesses. The problem was finding those weaknesses before it was too late. As the shuttle continued its journey, Yelena's mind began to settle. There was a path forward, a way out of the darkness. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth fighting for ever was. She was ready. She had to be. The galaxy was counting on them, and she wasn't going to let it down. The shuttle's engines hummed steadily. the stars stretching out before them as they made their way toward the hidden station. It was a small, secluded place, far from the Empire's watchful eyes. Once they arrived, they would begin the next phase of their journey, recruiting, strategizing, and preparing for the war that was to come. But as Yelena looked at Marcus, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore. And together they would find a way to take down the Empire one step at a time. "Marcus," Yelena said after a long pause, "you've got a plan, but do you think it's enough?" Marcus met her gaze, his eyes calm and determined. "I don't know yet, but I'm not backing down, not now." "Not ever." Yelena didn't respond, but her heart swelled with a newfound sense of resolve. There was no turning back now. The fight had only just begun. The shuttle had slowed as they approached the hidden station. Yelena stared out the small window, her gaze fixed on the distant, isolated structure. The station appeared as little more than a shadow in the void of space, its exterior barely visible against the backdrop of stars. To most, it would seem insignificant, just another forgotten relic of the past. But to her and Marcus, it was a sanctuary, a place where they could breathe, plan, and regroup. They were almost there. It had taken days to get this far, with the Empire's ships still searching the galaxy for them. Marcus had kept the shuttle on course, never straying too far from their planned route, always avoiding the major hyperspace lanes. The Empire would be less likely to track them if they didn't take the usual routes. But even so, Yelena knew they were playing a dangerous game. The Empire had resources beyond imagination. No one was truly safe. As they approached the station, Marcus flipped a few switches and the lights inside the shuttle dimmed. He was preparing to dock. Yelena remained silent, her mind still swirling with thoughts of what came next. She had a plan now, a vague idea of what they needed to do to begin their rebellion. But there were so many uncertainties. How would they find the allies they needed? How would they convince others to join a cause that seemed so impossible? Marcus's voice broke through her thoughts. "We'll land in a few minutes. You should rest while you can. There's no telling how long we'll be here." Yelena nodded, though she wasn't sure she could rest. She had never been good at slowing down. It was a luxury she hadn't allowed herself for years. But she was tired, deeply tired. The emotional weight of everything, the betrayal, the escape, the constant running, was beginning to take its toll. She leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes. The hum of the shuttle's engines was the only sound filling the cabin. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to relax, to forget the war that loomed ahead. It was a fleeting moment of peace, but it was enough. As the shuttle docked, the metallic hiss of the airlock opening echoed through the cabin. Marcus stood, his movements quick and precise. "Let's get moving," he said, offering a hand to help her up. Yelena took his hand, rising to her feet with a slight groan. Her muscles were stiff from sitting for so long, but she ignored the discomfort. They had work to do. The station's interior was dimly lit, with low, flickering lights casting shadows across the walls. The air smelled old, stale, even as if the place hadn't seen fresh air in years. But it was safe for now, safe from the Empire. Marcus led her through a narrow hallway, past doors that were locked or boarded up. The station had been abandoned for years, a relic from an earlier time, long forgotten by the galaxy. But Marcus knew it well. He had spent time here before, and he was confident that it could provide the shelter they needed. "Where are we going?" Yelena asked, glancing around at the abandoned corridors. She wasn't sure what to expect from a place like this. It looked like a forgotten outpost, not the kind of place where rebellions were born. "Follow me," Marcus replied, his voice calm. "We've got a few safe rooms here, places where we can hide out while we figure out our next move." They reached a heavy door at the end of the corridor. Marcus punched in a code on the keypad beside it, and the door slid open with a low, grinding sound. Inside, there was a small room, barely furnished with a few old chairs and a table in the center. It was simple, but it would do. It was all they had. Yelena stepped inside, taking a deep breath. "This is it," Marcus nodded. "For now, it's not much, but it's secure." Yelena looked around, trying to ignore the fact that it felt like they were hiding in plain sight. The walls were bare, the windows sealed shut. It was a far cry from the life she had once known, but she pushed those thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to focus on the past. She had to think about the future. "So what now?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt. "How do we start?" Marcus went to the table and sat down, pulling up a data pad. He scanned the screen for a moment before looking back at her. "Now we start building. We need to find allies, Rebels, outcasts, anyone who hates the Empire as much as we do. And then we begin the real work, gathering resources, training, and making sure we don't get caught. Yelena's heart raced. This was it, the beginning of the rebellion. But the weight of it all was almost too much to bear. She had spent so long fighting alone, relying on her own strength, her own will. Now she was asking others to join her cause. She would have to convince them that this fight was worth it. She took a seat across from Marcus, her hands folded in her lap. How do we know they'll join us? How do we get them to listen? Marcus's expression softened, and he leaned back in his chair. We show them that we're not afraid. We show them that the Empire can be beaten, that we don't have to live under their rule. People are looking for a reason to fight. They just need someone to lead them. Yelena considered his words. She had never thought of herself as a leader. She had always been a warrior, a fighter, someone who acted first and thought later. But Marcus was right. This wasn't about fighting one battle. This was about winning a war. And to do that, they would need more than just weapons. They needed people. She looked at him, her eyes steady. Then we'll find them. We'll make them see that it's worth the risk. Marcus smiled, a rare and fleeting moment of warmth in his otherwise serious demeanor. That's the spirit. We'll take it one step at a time. Yelena stood and moved toward the window, gazing out at the stars. The station was a safe haven for now, but they couldn't stay here forever. The Empire would come looking for them. It was only a matter of time. She felt the weight of everything, of the people she had lost, of the rebellion they were about to build, of the future that awaited them all. But despite the uncertainty, there was something else, too, a flicker of hope. They were starting something bigger than themselves. They were fighting for freedom, for justice. They were fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And no matter what came next, Yelena knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore.